Welcome everyone to the next Catributors podcast. Tonight it's just Jedi and myself, and we are going to be basically talking about the dev Q&A that happened. When did it happen? A few weeks in the past, I think.
Yeah, I think they had a window up in May for people to ask questions, and then I got ahead of myself in one of the previous podcasts and was like, oh, there's a new one. Except they hadn't actually answered any of the questions yet. So, yeah, but we're actually now getting around to covering that. And there's enough there that this is pretty much going to be our main topic. Not that much other news, really, is there? So it was a good time to cover it.
Yeah, there hasn't been anything else basically in the last week. So we can start off here like basically with the first question, which is why are new maps so rare? And I mean, there's an interesting answer. Basically, Wargaming says that the main reason is that after the game started, they had to make a lot of maps to finish the map pool. And then they now think they have a good number of maps. And I mean, yeah, they also say like obviously each new map they have, whenever they get to update their technology, higher quality textures and so on, the more maps they have, the more work it is and so on. Of course, what they seem to kind of ignore is that new maps is sort of content that people expect, because obviously you want the game to be a little bit different from time to time to have something new, something exciting to explore, right? It gets quite stale if you're always on the same map.
Yeah, I think something that can compound that a bit as well is that in order to sort of reduce server-side load, they tend to, and this is something that they do a lot of tanks as well, they have a certain number of maps in rotation on any given day. So you don't have all maps available all the time as a player. And some maps, of course, only come up very, very rarely, like Ocean, which is sort of like just often enough to remind you that it's still there, but it's still a pretty uncommon occurrence when you do get Ocean. It's still quite notable. But I mean, I can kind of understand their point, though, that there are now like nearly more than just over 3 dozen maps. That's probably not even. Well, actually, do they count the maps exclusive to operations in that? They might lump.
That's a good question.
34, not counting those linked to temporary events. So some, I guess they're not counting some maps in that, but they might be counting some of the operations maps, because some of those are or have been in sort of regular rotation as well. So yeah, there's a bit of a question mark on that, but even so, it's still a fair number of maps that they have. But I definitely take your point as well that that it's one of those things where even like 1 or 2 a year, or even 1 a year would be, something. Some sort of bit of new content for players to enjoy. I mean, if you compare it to other multiplayer games where they actually don't tend to, like, we almost have an expectation in games like this and World of Tanks that that we will get this constant drip feed of new maps to play on, whereas a lot of multiplayer games that's generally not the case. Like they tend to have a fairly fixed and unchanging number of maps. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe our expectations are just different because the matches are a bit shorter, or because the maps have such a strong influence on the actual gameplay, as opposed to I don't know, like multiplayer shooter games, for instance. I mean, if you look at the really famous one that's on the Source engine, that Counter-Strike, there we go. Well, I was really trying. Like, some of the maps in there are kind of like super famous and really well known, and there's like super in-depth strats, and it's not like they've been continuously putting out new maps for the entire time. So yeah, it's interesting. I think the expectations of the players are definitely different. So that's part of it. But yeah, I think a modest number of new maps, like even just one a year, I think would be sort of a happy medium, and that way they are giving a bit more variety to players, but also at the same time, it's not kind of eating up that many resources. And it's almost, you have to also remember, it's almost like them adding new ships as well. Like the more, like they could just infinitely keep adding new maps, but of course that's going to grow the game client a lot over time. Although I don't know how much space on your hard disk the maps take up versus the ships. I mean, I'm sure at this point the ship data is probably a much higher proportion. But
Probably.
yeah. But there's also the possibility that they could retire some older, less popular maps, maybe, and do it that way, so that you don't, like, they're not in this position of adding more stuff to the client than they want to. So
Or rework older maps.
Yeah, or even I mean, they have done that in the past. I mean, some of them have been reworked multiple times at this point. Like I think Islands of Ice is quite a good example, which is sort of very different than its original configuration.
I mean, I think what any multiplayer game kind of needs or should have is it needs to a way to be kept fresh while the core gameplay is sort of going to be the same. Like one way is obviously adding new ships to get a new experience, but I mean, a new map is just a much more complete new experience, I feel like, because you don't know exactly, once you play the new map, you don't know exactly where to go, like where are the good positions, how is this map going to be played until like a meta sort of develops. It's something new to explore, it's a new scenery just to look at. I feel like it's just a very nice experience. So it would be like new game modes, for example. Ships are just, I mean, yeah, sure, some ships play differently than others, but it's a lot easier to get that new feeling, I think, with a new map than with just a new ship, because in the end of the day, we've mostly seen all sorts of ship types.
I suppose so, and we are at the stage of the game where there's not that many kind of major classes of ship from the sort of relevant time periods that the game covers that aren't in the game somehow. I mean, there's probably some odd examples here and there, but we're seeing a lot more sort of paper designs, and sometimes even extremely wargaming creations being more kind of the focus rather than actual historical ships. So yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, I think the only like Royal Navy capital ship that we don't really have represented, for instance, is the Revenge class. And aside from that, especially with the battle cruisers that have just come in, yes, some of them are definitely paper designs, but there's also like the Queen Marys and the Renown and the Tiger at Tier 5 representing the Splendid Cats. It's like there's not that much left now. And there's other odd classes of ship here and there for other navies, but there's a lot of stuff that's sort of fairly well represented. Another example the other day I was looking at was the Duquesne and the Suffren class cruisers for France, which we'll probably see as well added at some point. But in terms of like stuff that can go in as whole new lines, we're at the stage where they've added the Spanish tech tree and stuff like that. It's sort of like much more minor navies, and so I take your point there. Like maps are kind of a sort of universal new feature, whereas not everybody is going to be interested in every line sort of thing. But I think, given what you said, or you also mentioned like new game modes and stuff, I would probably more like to see stuff like that and new operations rather than like I said, I'm happy with a small number of new maps. I don't have any super great expectations there.
Yeah, they say they wanna go to that they want from now on have 1 or 2 new maps a year. I mean, that's fine. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, to be honest, I'm sort of fairly happy with that answer. And the fact that, I mean, we've talked about this previously now that they've done all the underwater stuff and reworking existing maps that way. I think they're still doing some reworking of existing maps as well, but yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of resources have been freed up for actual, whole new map design. So yeah, I don't know about you. I'm entirely happy with that answer.
Yeah, definitely.
So when you go on to a sort of another map-related thing, will Epicenter be reworked / reintroduced? And I know a lot of people do not like Epicenter, just as a thing. I don't like it on certain maps, but I know a lot of people just are like, in fact, this sort of ties into what I was saying as well. Like World of Tanks has a map ban system, so you can set certain maps that you will almost never see. You might get pulled in if you're in the matchmaker too long, but it's one of those features that was quite popular when it was introduced. So if there's a map you really really don't want to play, you can stick it on your ban. Like you can say, I don't want to see this map, and you won't. And actually, Wargaming uses that as a measure of which maps are more or less popular. So if you had that feature in World of Warships and a bunch of people had X map, that is on their ban list, they might go, okay, maybe we retire that map or we rework that map. But yeah, you can also select or deselect certain modes as well. And I'm sure if people could do that, there would be a whole bunch of people that would deselect Epicenter. So, as they say, the main issue with Epicenter is not the pace of the battles, but the fact all 24 ships converge on one point. This, in turn, significantly lowers the variety of gameplay and increases the density of interaction between ships, making this game mode unsatisfactory for the majority of players. I do wonder if they've done, like, if they're using player survey feedback when they say, a majority.
I have no idea, but I feel like, I mean, that makes me laugh because the problem is that they don't converge on a point. That's the whole problem of Epicenter. It's not that the game mode in itself would be a bad idea. It's that it only works at lower tiers because, I mean, lower tiers are smaller, like the maps are smaller, and the people are more, let's say, brave at lower tiers. At higher tiers, people just sit at the zone right and ignore the objective, and that's the biggest problem of Epicenter. It doesn't actually lead to that center fight that you'd want.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, now that it is effectively been replaced by arms race being a possibility in just the random rotation, no longer being a separate mode, I mean, I guess they will wait at least a good few patches to gather data on that. Personally, I quite like it. There are certain maps I still wouldn't mind Epicenter versions of, even over and above just the usual standard, 2-cap circle mode, which is, honestly, if I had to choose between Epicenter and standard, I would take Epicenter. But yeah, I mean, I personally think that was quite a good thing, having arms race come in, and I don't know, maybe there are some people that miss Epicenter if there were questions about reworking and possibly reintroducing Epicenter at some point. So
I mean, they have reworked Epicenter in the past because originally, like if you were in the center, we were capping all 3 rings simultaneously.
Yes, that's true. And then they changed them to effectively be separate.
I'm not sure how much you could further rework Epicenter, though. I feel like I didn't mind it at lower tiers, but at higher tiers I found it dreadful. I'd still prefer Epicenter over Standard Battle, personally. But I like that we now have Arms Race. I think Arms Race is a better mode, personally.
I think you're right there. I think Epicenter at higher tiers tended to be less fun overall, although I quite enjoyed it on, was it Tears of the Desert?
Just like pain, admitted.
Well, it's not that. I think also that it was a much bigger, certainly even a much bigger center area as opposed to like Trident, where it's quite a small center area and it's really not that much fun to, especially if you're in a destroyer and trying to contest that mid cap. But I think on bigger maps, Epicenter works a bit better. I don't know. I would. I mean, like I said, I wouldn't mind if it was still in the game. I can kind of see why they've, like, if it was mostly unpopular based on player feedback and sort of player numbers and whatever other stats they collated, then okay, fair enough. But they do say at the end of this, we're now focused on developing new game modes, so there might be other things that they have in the works as well. I mean, we might see who hands up who remembers the fort mode. I can't even remember what it's called, but with the AI forts that were firing on ships, and you had to capture it to gain control, and like these days, the only sort of vague remnant of that is the AI forts you find in various operations. But that was. I don't know, a bit of a failed experiment, but maybe you could bring something like that back in some form. I don't know. Like, there's various things you could do with that. Capture, you
Definitely.
capture an adjacent airfield, and it does Dutch-style airdrops on nearby enemies, or there's probably things you could do.
I mean, there's certainly things that you could try. We shall see. So far, Wargaming has been not that creative, I feel like, when it comes to the game modes.
They do tend to be fairly conservative, yes. I think. I mean, we do see new stuff every so often, but not that often in terms of game modes. So they seem to be a bit unwilling to rock the boat too much. But I mean, we do. Having said that, they have shown a willingness to test new stuff in its own game mode in the past. So
true. Then
so still on the theme of maps.
Yeah, are there unbalanced maps? And of course, we have they say that Ocean has a 51.8% win rate on one side. This difference is statistically insignificant. Honestly, that's for a map that's basically just empty. I want to know why. Like, there must be so many battles played on Ocean so far that you shouldn't have a 51.8 difference in win rate. So there must be a reason for that.
This is going to be one of those things where maybe it's psychological.
Yeah,
players feeling like the top of the map and the bottom of the map kind of thing. I don't know. I honestly, with Ocean, given that I've only ever tended to see it at high tier games, maybe they should just make it bigger overall. Or
bigger. It would make it so much worse.
Or maybe just Ocean Epicenter. I don't know.
I mean, Ocean only exists in Domination, and I think only as tier 10. I'm not sure. It might be tier 10 only.
I do wonder if they've ever experimented with changing the position of the cap circles so that they're in a like a perpendicular line rather than like in diagonal line on the map, if that would particularly make a difference. I don't know. I think it's just always going to have the problem with Ocean of like, yes, there's an old meme of it's the only historical map in the game, but the idea of having absolutely no cover, it all becomes about stealth and trying to get unspotted, and it's a lot harsher on some ships than others, and it really then all comes down to it's sort of like which ships are on which team, and how good / bold / timid players might be.
I mean, it's just hurting a lot of cruisers because of the overmatch, because cruisers just can't angle. There are a lot of cruisers that are really relying on making the best of their terrain. And there are certain maps already that have very bad island placement for certain cruisers where like, oh, damn it, I've spawned here, I'm in trouble, right? But at least there is something there. On Ocean, you have nothing. You have no way to ever be in cover, right? And a lot of the cruisers that need cover also don't have the range. And especially on the ocean, like the battleships will probably be even further back than they usually would be. So as a cruiser, you have to be probably 5 kilometers in front of your battleships or even more in order to have anything to shoot at. You're going to get focused by the enemy team. You can't angle. It's just like it's a horror for quite a few ships, I suppose.
Yeah. It's I can't think of any good solutions really, other than either take it out or every cruiser just if you're in a cruiser and you're on ocean, you get a fuel smoke. Probably technically not feasible. They do say, competitive modes, that the situation isn't that different. So they don't really go into detail on the stats too much, but they give a couple of percentages here and there. But they also do say at the end, although they claim that we don't currently have any maps with one spawn in random battles having the upper hand. So it sounds like they're fairly satisfied with the performance of the current crop overall, and I honestly can't think of any that are like anecdotally problematic, but maybe I'm just not paying attention.
There are certainly maps that are probably not perfectly balanced, but for random battles, I think it's all fine, right? I've never been on a map where I was like, oh my god, if I spawn on this side, it's not like between the red and the green team. It's more like between like the 3 caps where you spawn. There's definitely something like, oh my god, in this cruise I've spawned on the C cap and I wanted to spawn on the A cap, something like that. But it's never been like, oh no, I'm on I don't know, the north side instead of the south side or something like that. So personally, I'm satisfied. It's probably it's not perfectly balanced, but for me, it's satisfactory.
They've always, I think they fairly early on realized that making maps sort of vaguely symmetrical was a lot easier to do and still make them kind of vaguely interesting looking. They're not particularly naturalistic, but if you compare it to the likes of War Thunder, even World of Tanks, where some of the maps have been around for a really long time and some of them are still considered to be, sort of not particularly balanced. And I know that's a big problem on some War Thunder maps as well, especially at the higher tiers when you have people shooting, several kilometers away from each other, which, for tanks is pretty long range. It's not really much for warships, but there are I think even 1 or 2 still where it's like, oh, you've spawned on this one cap on this one map at this BR, and guess what? People can, just drive a couple of 100 meters out their spawn and snipe the other spawn kind of thing. So I don't know if it's just inherently easier because of warships, or if there's just because there's less pressure to make the environments look naturalistic. There are some very artificial looking, quite symmetrical maps, certainly in World of Tanks, and I don't know if they're particularly popular from a player point of view. So I don't know. Maybe it's just a slightly easier overall sort of inherent thing to do better, more balanced maps in warships. I can certainly think of some particularly egregious examples of maps from yesteryear in World of Tanks, but some of which just got pulled from the game completely because they just could not figure out ways to balance. There'd be like, nearly 10% difference in win rates between the spawns. Port was one of them. I don't know if you played World of Tanks a little bit back in the day, didn't you? I can't remember, but there was one that was kind of like...
for a few years. I played it until they introduced personal missions.
Okay, that's a ways back. You might have played Port at some point then. But yeah, it was like really visually interesting map, but it was also horribly unbalanced in that like one of the, I can't remember if it was the north or south spawn, but basically had a massive statistical advantage, relatively speaking. So yeah, I expect, given that they cite specific numbers for ocean, nearly 52% win rate, there might be other maps that have that kind of a couple of percent either way, or that they are happy with a couple of percent either way.
they basically bring up Ocean to show that. I think what they want to show is that even in a perfectly balanced map, basically there will be some fluctuation. But honestly, I feel like this is too. I would be really interested what causes that, because this doesn't look like a random statistical fluctuation. There must be a reason behind it. It's not problematic in that sense. It's not so far off that I'd say, oh my god.
Yeah, it's more of an interesting puzzle in that particular case, isn't it? It's like, we've made this completely open, inherently balanced map where nobody has any inherent advantages on anyone else in terms of where they spawn or what terrain they have or anything like that to hide behind. And yet still it's not the almost dead on, if not dead on 50-50 that you would think. So I don't know. Anyway.
A mystery to be solved.
Yeah.
Next question is, will the game engine ever be swapped for another? And that basically the short answer is no.
Yeah. I mean, it's unlikely. That's a pretty major switch. Even the big changes World of Tanks has gone through, it's been like it's still the big world engine, but it's sort of unrecognizable from what they started out with. There just have been so many changes to it over the years. So given that Warships almost had the advantage of coming in after they already had many years of experience using it, there's unlikely to be the need for a giant shift. Pretty much the only thing I could think of, like, it depends how much life the game has left in it, but if they make it a DX12 application at some point, but even if that happens, that's probably several years off, and that's it's still a fairly fundamental change to make, but it's not the same. It's not quite as fundamental as building a whole new game engine from the ground up.
Yeah,
I mean, even the big change World of Tanks went through when they went to their 1.0 game engine. They'd already sort of in several previous patches started to introduce more HD elements into the game in a sort of gradual process. So sort of the big jump really was making the maps all a lot more detailed and changing some other fairly substantial parts of the game engine as well. But it was still, at the heart of it, it was still big world.
I mean, honestly, like from the visuals and so on, like World of Warships is beautiful, right? And I have kept improving it, and I'm very happy with that. The more concerning thing for me would be things like when the aiming system or like the feedback and so on, like they have. It seems to me like gameplay aspect wise, they do a great job with the visuals, but gameplay aspect wise, you have a feeling they don't understand their own engine half of the time. But they will still never swap it because there's too much work in it.
Yeah, I can't. You see examples of other game companies out there that have developed their own engine, and then they're like, well, going forwards, we're going to use Unreal 5 or something else. So if there was at some point a new World of whatever title, there's a chance that they might just go, okay, we're going to go with this big existing engine like Unreal and adapt our assets for that, because I think especially some of the latest ones like Unreal 5 have a lot of sort of flexibility, and they're a lot easier to get into as opposed to engines that are specific to a specific company. And Big World has been used by other companies in the past, but by far the biggest titles that have ever used it are World of Tanks and World of Warships. So there's probably not that much experience out there working on this engine, other than if you're working for wargaming in some capacity. So it's kind of one of those things where it might be like, okay, it's going to be cheaper to hire people with experience of this big, well-known engine rather than having to hire someone and then train them up to use our own internal engine with all its own sort of idiosyncrasies. I'm trying to think of.
But the problem is, if you were to actually switch engines, you'd have to recreate all like the gameplay on a completely new engine. So it's going to be so long and expensive that it's just never gonna.
That's a huge undertaking. Absolutely. Even sometimes going from different versions of one engine to another, like Kerbal Space Program is a great example when they went from was it 32-bit to 64-bit? They had to spend like year and a half just sort of essentially porting the game over into the newer version of, was it Unity? Or I can't even remember what KSP uses. I have a feeling it might be Unity. But they basically went from an older version to a much newer version, and it was a huge undertaking. It kind of like there weren't really any other particular updates to the game for quite a long while, just because they were all working on this. It is Unity. Okay, so and the fact that they moved versions of Unity meant that the new version could do a lot of stuff better and sort of use its assets more efficiently than previous versions. It was certainly a lot better for modders because you didn't quite have the old hard cap of the how much memory you had before the game just kind of went, oh, no more memory, I've crashed, hit the RAM limit. So I don't think there were really any major technical limitations in the implementation of Big World that Warships uses. That we know of anyway. I mean, considering that the very, very original implementation was meant as a game for sort of online RPGs, the fact that they've done what they have with it and put all these quite comparatively complex physics calculations into it, and now we have submarines and stuff, which just on a technical level, adding that whole new Z-axis almost that didn't really need to be a thing before. I'm sure that took a lot of work, but it's still not nearly as much work as doing a whole new engine. So I don't see that happening. I
mean, the more concerning part is that the engine sometimes seems to be better than, like when we had the problem, or there's still the problem, right? How often it calculates that you shoot your shells. So there seem to be certain limitations with the engine that they have, and the more stuff they put into it, it seems a bit strained, but I still don't think that we'll ever see them change the engine.
No, I mean, not for this. Like, theoretically, if there's ever a World of Warships 2.0 or World of Warships 2 or World of Warships Advanced or whatever, they might well, like I said, decide to start with something that has a bit more flexibility to it. But I mean, they're actually saying this. At the moment, we see limitations not on the engine side, but the need to support the full range of hardware available to our players. And this sort of kind of couples into the recent news of they've actually upped the very minimum spec, and it's still we're still talking graphics cards from like 10, 11, 12 years ago kind of thing. So there's still quite a wide range of hardware that the game will run on. But this is almost like this is very long running joke about Willow tanks, especially older versions. So it will run on a toaster, especially on sort of minimum graphics, and it sort of ties into the home user base in Russia, which certainly for Willow tanks is still by far the kind of biggest individual server region in terms of numbers. That there is a huge number of people that, especially in the last couple of years with the expense of video cards and things like that, and I'm sure at the moment with sanctions and things as well, they're still grimly hanging on with their old hardware because they cannot, afford, or that there aren't even the parts available to get newer stuff. So I guess Warships kind of has that problem as well, but maybe a bit less so, just because it's quite a bit less Russia centric than World of Tanks. So
What I also find interesting in the answer is that, for example, they say, for example, the water system, the forest system, and the visibility system have been completely rewritten. There's a forest system? What's the forest? I mean, obviously there are trees.
I guess they mean like how trees are modeled and rendered and LODs and all that sort of thing.
Why
that used to be a real memory hog. I guess they've reworked that quite substantially over time. But that used to be one of the standard pieces of advice is just turn all the kind of foliage detail down to minimum, because you can actually get a pretty decent little bump to your frames.
Yeah, but is there something happening with you? Like, I mean, are trees somewhat different from like the houses they put? I mean, they have even cars that move around. But what's it? They call it a forest system. I'm now wondering, like, are trees like moving somehow in the wind, or is there like when they call it a forest system? It sounds to me like there is more to it than just tree models.
Well, that might just be a weird translation.
Also a possibility. But I'm not curious. When I hear forest system, I expect suddenly that you are able to harvest and plant trees.
yeah. There's actually a really deep forest simulation system going on behind the scenes in World of Warships that nobody ever knew about. That like there's individual stats for each trees, and there's digitally simulated like birds and seeds and seasonal cycles and. Yep.
I mean, wouldn't that be interesting? Suddenly, like, why does this game need so much memory now? We developed a new system where trees like gets spread around and grow.
I think that is just a bit of like not particularly great translation, but it really does. It really does. Perform a lot more stably than it used to. I like just in the time I've been even like playing and recording videos, and yes, I've had some hardware upgrades in that time, but even sort of in between hardware upgrades, some of the changes they've made, like it used to, when I very first started recording, would sometimes I had to play around a lot with getting settings levels and recordings to sort of recording settings to get stable 30 FPS, and these days it's like, oh yeah, I can record it above 60, absolutely no problem. And it's not like I've got top of the line hardware or anything like that. So it does run pretty well these days. They've done a pretty good job, and like they point out at the end that the version they use is quite significantly different in some ways than the one used for World of Tanks, because that's dealing with much smaller maps, but also a lot higher fidelity of details, just because you're a lot closer up to a lot of the details. Whereas unless camera modes and flying around, that's not really an issue in World of Warships. So yeah, sort of an interesting question though. And
definitely,
it does make me wonder if they do have plans to upgrade to DX12 at some point as more people move to more modern operating systems. I don't think there's any. I think DX11 will probably be around for a while yet, though.
Probably. And the next question we have is, what happened to breakthrough mode and the map bearing sea? I completely forgot that this was a thing.
I don't even remember what breakthrough mode is, to be honest.
So they basically linked to a dev blog from, I don't know, when was this? 2019.
Okay.
And basically,
yeah.
So they
I vaguely remember this.
Yeah, so basically the teams would spawn solar next to each other, and they'd have to make it to the area on the other side or something like that. So basically it seems like the thing, like the breakthrough mode didn't work out. But the question that I have is, why didn't they use they had a map that was to the point where they could play and test on? So they dropped the game mode, sure, but why did they drop the map?
Yeah, maybe it was too much built around. I mean, there was a standard. There was a domination mode version of it as well. But,
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe maybe the win rates weren't balanced enough in domination mode, and it was more geared around the breakthrough mode. I don't know, but yeah, I'd honestly forgotten about this map and this mode entirely. I mean, I don't think it mustn't have been around for terribly long. I'm only vaguely remembering this.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I mean, I suppose it's there in their back pocket to redevelop at some point, but I suppose, yeah, what as to why they don't redevelop that and re-add it as opposed to doing entirely new maps, who knows?
I mean, they basically say that the game mode didn't quite work out, and so development on it was halted. But I don't understand why halt the development on the map, right? They have already spent months probably in getting the map to this point that they could do like the testing and the stuff on. Why throw that away, right? Why not change a little bit up on the map? Like, why start from scratch with a new map when you have basically put so much work into an old map that just needs maybe some finishing? That's what I don't understand, right? But, wargaming works in mysterious ways.
Indeed, very mysterious. So then we're on to the Dirigible Derby, which is a much more recent thing, and that I definitely remember playing because it was only earlier this year. So yeah, they said that from the feedback they gathered, the results were quite positive, and that they are bringing it back, or they plan to bring it back to the main servers, temporary mode, towards the end of the year. Well, we'll see if there's any changes to go with that, but there is at least the possibility of this becoming something that goes into the random rotation in the same way that arms races come now into the random rotation. To be honest, I think that would make a nice change up to random battles is Dirigible Derby. It's certainly less sort of it's symmetrical mode. It's not like the combat mode, which was inherently asymmetrical, in which they had to really work on to. And I don't know if it's still particularly balanced in terms of the attacking or the defending team. And the asymmetrical modes in games are always inherently harder to balance, and there are even entire games that have been based around asymmetric gameplay that I don't know if any of them has ever really taken off. They've all had problems in one way or another, but that really wasn't an issue with Dirigible Derby. So yeah, I'd be perfectly happy to see that in the random rotation.
Yeah, I think it was a better version Convoy. They just never managed, I think, to get Convoy good. Like, Convoy had two, well, maybe they will eventually, but Convoy so far I felt always had major problems. Catributors wasn't perfect, but it was very nice, right? With both teams had like that Zeppelin that they pushed with sitting underneath in that.
And the fact that you can either have, you have this kind of mixed strategy of you have to get your own pushed forward, but you also have to counter other people, the other team trying to disrupt that, and at the same time, maybe you have some of your own team members trying to disrupt theirs. It's a nice mix of gameplay compared to standard games.
Yeah, I think it could have had some more improvements, but it was definitely a good first try, and if they bring it back, I'm sure there will be some changes, so I'm looking forward to that.
It's nice. It's nice to know they haven't forgotten about that. Oh, Sam, I'm having for those that are unaware, I mean, ATAM is, but there is I have my cat dad shirt on, and there is a cat on my desk as well, who is wriggling around and jostling things. So, yeah.
Clearly, he's today's guest on the podcast.
Yep, that is today's guest. So, yeah, if you see random jiggles or wiggles or me leaning forward to move things around, it's because Sam's trying to knock things over, or is bumping the mouse, or, doing something.
Well, then the next question is, do you keep competitive play in mind when creating new maps? And I basically say not all modes are designed for competitive activities. I mean, this is fine, right? The thing is, if you have something competitive, it really needs to be in a way perfectly balanced, like the maps and so on. But this makes it look less natural, right? This makes it like for random battles, if it's slightly off, like 51 to 39 or so, like a map or so, that's perfectly fine. It's like it's better to give maps, I think, a slightly more natural look for random battles, and then just have some dedicated competitive maps just for competitive play.
I mean, that's essentially what they've done in World of War Tanks. World of Tanks, where there are, or at least were competitive only maps. I think at least one of them got put into the random pool. But yeah, I would, like if they want even the amount of competitive play that we have, which is reasonably popular within the community. Hopefully they're putting the resources into that and actually getting feedback from the competitive community, because that's the most important thing in that instance, is listening to what is needed for a good competitive map / mode in order for it to work. So yeah, I don't think we're ever, like, they seem to have thoroughly abandoned any notion of this ever being a kind of full-on esports game, despite the fact that there was a push for a couple of years and there was some resources put into that. But they decided that wasn't to be. They decided it wasn't sort of going to return the investment, I guess. So we now have the kind of level of community-driven. Even though wargaming's sort of taken on stuff like Kings of the Sea themselves, it's still all fairly community driven, in the it came out of the community, and it's still sort of like the rules and all that are still heavily influenced by the competitive community. So hopefully any new things they add or any changes they make will be similarly taking on board feedback from the community. But yeah, it's interesting they kind of acknowledge that, like, first and foremost, anything new that they come up with for the game is going to be just for everyone, all players, rather than sort of the more niche side of things, which I guess makes sense, given that esports wasn't really a big thing in this game.
True.
So it's not even to the extent with World of Tanks, where you've had like proper, sort of finals events and things, at least in past years.
I've never followed World of Tanks esports.
I don't know if there was that was probably more than needed to be said for that answer. I just kind of started rambling.
Well, yeah, then the next point is, will we see night battles on Operation Cherry Blossom again?
That I would like to see. Like, Cherry Blossom was actually... it still remains unique in that it starts off like, nighttime, and you've got the flares coming down, and it's a very pretty effect, and it gradually brightens up quite a lot. We've never had anything like that since, and it actually worked pretty well for Cherry Blossom. So it's one of those things where it's unclear why they didn't take that and use it in other things. So who knows? And Cherry Blossom was one of the more interesting ops as well. Not just aside from that, but I guess because it was one that heavily relied on
scripting,
aircraft carriers, and sort of the planes coming to attack from the enemy base, as well as the allied aircraft carrier that you had to protect. That it was kind of unsurprising that it vanished.
So what they say is they have some ideas for implementing nighttime as a visual effect on maps. I'm interested in how this goes, because they then go to say that they don't necessarily have an idea for gameplay mechanic. So I presume they just want to make the maps a bit darker?
Maybe, yeah. I imagine, I mean, we do kind of have a nighttime-ish map in the form of Northern Lights, where it's still really, really bright.
I mean, there is There's also one of the lower tier maps that has the moon out. That's really pretty. It's a bit darker.
I can't even remember which one that would be, but yeah, I guess they mean as a limited. Yeah, I mean specifically say that due to the fact that it limits visibility. So they're I guess sticking to the cyclone mode or the roving storm mode, which I can't even remember what the specific name of that is that you have on some maps, as opposed to it starting off light and then ending with it going dark or going from dark to light. Which that in of itself, having that kind of cherry blossom style, you start off in the dark and the ranges are quite limited, and then it starts to open up towards the end. That might actually make for a somewhat interesting idea, but it seems like they don't have any interest in that. So,
I mean, they say that in the future,
they do
kind of explore.
They leave the door open to it. I guess what they're saying is they don't have any immediate plans, but maybe in the future, perhaps.
Perhaps. We would like to see it, I guess.
Yeah, it's not a hard no. It's not a hard no, I guess, is the takeaway from that answer.
But they seem to have some idea for implementing more nighttime visuals without a gameplay effect. I'm also looking forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, if it's going to be for purely aesthetic reasons, there's absolutely no why not. There's no reason why not to use sort of bright nighttime visuals to visually differentiate a map.
I mean, especially ships that have camos that are glowing, like for example the space camos or so on. They look so nice when it's a bit darker.
Some of them do, yeah.
Then next we are back to operations, and this year we will return previously withdrawn operations. Yeah, we have heard that a few times.
Yes. So I don't know if there's anything specifically new here.
I mean, they say that they want to change sort of the tiers that you can play ships in, but not change the bot ships themselves, but just gave them a buff.
That's not super new in that when operations first came in, there was a 2-tier spread possible. But they then dropped that to be single tier only. Should we read out the whole thing? Because I know a lot of people are interested in operations.
Sure.
So this year we will return previously withdrawn operations to the game. We plan to not only return them, but also make them, and the ones currently available, playable for different ship tiers. First, it'll be tier 6 to tier 8 ships, which, that's sort of been the spread of operations ships previously, but maybe it means, I'm guessing they mean by that, what is currently, say, a tier 6, will be able to take tier 7, maybe even tier 8 ships, but you'll face harder enemies? I don't know. At the same time, bot ships will not change, but they'll get specific bonuses to their characteristics depending on the setup of the player team. Okay, so
higher tier ships, they'll get buffs.
Yeah, so that sort of clarifies that a bit. That there will be stronger opponents, but not like different opponents. They'll just be opponents with better buffs. If it goes well in the future, we'll expand operations to higher ship tiers. For now, the feature is still in development, so unfortunately we cannot reveal all the details, but we will definitely share new information, blah, blah, blah. As for new operations, we don't have any final plans yet. So, yeah, we will wait for older operations to be released on the live server. I think that's fair because there are, of the, 4 in rotation at the moment, there's another at least double that, like 4, 5, maybe even 6 that, were retired. So I'm perfectly happy with the idea that they revamp operations and return some of the retired ones, if not all of the retired ones, back into active rotation before they start thinking about adding new ones. I think that part's reasonable, but it would be nice to have a bit more of a timeline on when they actually are going to operations back.
If they actually bring them back, yeah.
So we're over halfway through the year, so it can't be that far in the future.
I mean, generally speaking, if they actually stick to their plan for once, I agree with this. Bring the old operations, all of them back, and open them up to all the tiers, and then just see how people like it, right? That's also something that has always been a bit limiting factor, of course, if you need like a specific tier ship. And I say if this, like the system works, they're going to extend it. So basically, you might be able to play operations from tier 6 to tier 10, right? And that would be great.
It would be interesting if you take your tier 10 in and you're still facing like Kawachis and Karlsruhes, but they're like absolute sort of
monster buffs.
Absolute monster versions of themselves. That might be kind of hilarious. Yeah, I mean it's like it's not clear. The one thing that's not clear from that is if they're going to a 3-tier spread on all operations, which wouldn't like that. Some of the operations were already like tier 8, like Cherry Blossom, for instance. So a 3-tier spread would put that up to tier 10. So yeah, it's not 100% clear from what they've written here how this spread will work. Will it be a 2-tier spread for each operation? Will it be a 3-tier spread? Who knows? Maybe they're just not going to bring back the tier 8 operations. Maybe they'll bounce them around tier 6, and then you'll be able to play them up to tier 8. I think they're probably being quite cautious as well, based on the need to not have people wait in the queues too long for matchmaking, because unlike random battles, it won't fill in the gap with bots. And it's also not clear if you'll be able to take mixed tiers as you were originally, where you could have a mix of, say, tier 5 and tier 6 ships in some operations. If you'll be able to have, say, sort of tier 6, tier 7, and tier 8 ships all in the same operation. Like, how would that work for the lower tier ones if the bots have all been buffed to face the tier 8s? That's going to make it that much harder. So
I mean, that's something that other games have fixed, and that could be. I'm not sure obviously how the ancient works, but you could give a ship a buff that it has a damage multiplier depending on which tier it shoots.
It would be interesting if the game engine was flexible enough for that, but I don't know if it is. It sounds like they would. My suspicion would be that it'll be still single tier matchmaking, but it will now have obviously a wider spread. So all the tier 6s will still be matched with other tier 6 ships, tier 7s, tier 8s, and so on.
I think that would be way too limiting.
Could be longer queues, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I would think that would be easier for them to do.
I mean, it's not like, it's not like it's impossible to have tier 6 and tier 7 ships in the same game, even if the enemies are slightly buffed, right? Also, they say that you can say for each tier 7 ship in the game, like they get a certain buff, right? So if you have like 3 tier 7s and the others are tier 6, then they get like 3 sort of buffs, like the enemy ships or so on. Which obviously would make it a bit harder for the tier 6s, but would still keep like all the enemy firepower sort of balanced. So I mean, there are ways around this. The question is just how much time will Wargaming invest in this. But I highly doubt that they will have a single tier for players. That would just be way too limiting, especially if they make up the operations for the 6, 7s, and 8s.
Yeah, maybe. It's not clear yet. I still think it will be single tier, and they'll rely on the matchmaking to do that. But who knows?
I mean, they do say they will get specific bonuses based on the setup of the player team. And the setup for me is like, they don't say based on the tier of the player team, but the setup, which would, for me, it sounds like you have different tiers, right?
It might be one of these things where if you're in the random queue, I mean, it might even be as complicated as if you're in the random queue, then it's single tier only, but you can take multiple different tiers if you're doing a full division setup. I mean, because even at the moment, you can do like the one variation you can do with operations at the moment is if you do the full division setup, you can actually have fewer than 7 ships, which that is one way of actually increasing the challenge of operations right now, is just have fewer players. So who knows? There's still some question marks over that, but it's generally positive news.
If it's true, for once.
There's always the possibility that they turn around later and go, well, we tried some things, didn't work out. Oh well, shrug. But I mean, I'm sort of heartened that they are talking about, well, we're not just going to bring it back as is, we're actually going to rework it a bit, which means that they're putting more resources in it than there has been in the last couple of years. They're actually taking it seriously, because for a long time operations were treated quite dismissively.
But you have to keep in mind they have promised about 5 times to bring back operations and lied every time. Like, we bring back operations is a lie that has been told so many times that it's very hard to believe that they take it serious this time. It could be, but they have lied multiple times, every year, multiple times about it.
I don't know. I mean, that's obviously the harshest possible interpretation, and I am absolutely not an apologist for poor gaming, but it might be just one of these things that it's such a low priority that other stuff that takes longer than expected or eats up more resources than expected.
It doesn't change that it's a lie if they say this year we're going to bring back operations, or in half a year we bring back operations, and then they don't do it, and then half a year later they say this time we're going to bring back operations. It's still a lie, It's
the very charitable interpretation is that they utterly overstated how important it was, and if they just kept bumping it down the list of, like, we're going to do this, I was like, it's only operations, doesn't matter, we'll just pull resources from that, we'll just delay it further. But yeah, the fact that they have definitively stated, this year for sure, you guys, it's sort of, I can see how people would look at that and go, it's a lie. I don't know if I'm quite that strident about it, but hopefully this time they mean it. And the fact that I don't know if he's officially not working on it anymore. I think he probably isn't, but Sub-Octavian, clearly operations were never a priority for him. All these promises were kind of made under his watch. So the fact that we're now at this stage where it's not Sub-Octavian anymore that's sort of pulling the strings, maybe they mean it this time. Maybe they actually have committed some resources to it that they're not just going to yank to do other things.
I'm very tired.
So, yeah.
Then
also
there is
worth pointing out, just before we go on, as in the chat, that there were people in the chat saying, that there was the promise it would be at the start of this year, but at least this year there is everything that happened with Ukraine and Wargaming divesting itself of Leicester, and
but if they start this year, it would have already been basically finished by.
That's true. It would have been in the production pipeline kind of thing.
It would have been basically almost finished because they started when.
So it's not that much of an excuse. I mean, that's still a thing that happened, but yeah. Anyway, so yeah, let's move on.
Can we expect to see old temporary modes such as Bathed Up and Torpedo Pete return? The question that everybody wants an answer to, and the answer is no. Wargaming is not going to bring... The more popular a mode is, the less likely Wargaming will bring it back.
I mean, the fact that Bathtub mode makes me particularly sad, because that was such a fun one. I think that the community remembers that one particularly fondly. It was just fun, bomb around, silly little boats, giant bathtub. It's very, very cartoony and silly and just fun. And it's one of the longer answers they give here, which is kind of justifying themselves of, hey, look, we're doing all these other things. And I suppose it's fair to point out they have limited amounts of resources, but still, the fact that they haven't even left the possibility open to bringing these back at some point in the future is definitely disheartening. I want my bathtub mode back, god damn it. It was fun. It was so much fun.
What is questioning for me is that they say it requires significant resources to update a mode to the current version. Now, I think I would have liked more news on that because the map is basically designed. Sure, the map might not be updated to any HD textures or so on, but the map basically exists, right? Sure, if you want to update it to the newest graphics, that's some work, but the old version, why wouldn't it still run? I don't know. But like, what gameplay tweaks? Like there was, like bathtub mode had specific ships with specific how they work. Like what have they changed in the code that makes the guns on those ships no longer work? That's what I want to hear, because I don't see it. It's not like they worked with like the captain skills, so any captain skill changes wouldn't.
You see, the thing is, they would have to rework the underwater part of the bathtub so that they could add submarines. That's probably the real reason. There is a line. I mean, they've not. I suppose having bemoaned that they've said no, that it does sort of finish by saying it's possible that some beloved old modes will return to the game, but not this year. But it really doesn't sound, that promising.
No, they again go into that they're going to plan to bring back operations.
Yes, so sort of.
They also say that the submarine Halloween event is probably coming back.
I mean, to be fair, that one was fairly fun as well. It's been the one fun submarine thing that's been in the game so far. Yeah, chat's also joking that they have to also, balance the bathtub for CVs and do special bathtub CVs.
I don't think there are any carriers in the bathtub. Of course, they're never going to bring this mode back. Damn it.
So we have a quite specific question now. Would it be possible to have a feature allowing teams queued for clan battles to see the next map? And I'm guessing this is so that players can more carefully choose their team composition. I don't really know enough about even clan battles to sort of semi-competitive team mode. That are different setups better on different maps? I don't know.
I mean, they say teams queued, so at this point you couldn't change your setup anymore.
I suppose, yeah.
I would assume that it allows you to talk strategy beforehand. I mean, obviously you have a little bit of time when you load into the battle, but if you like when you see in the matchmaker, you already see the map, you can already start talking like who's gonna go where or so. Maybe it's about that.
Yeah, I mean, you could sort of drop out the queue and rejig your setup and then go back into the queue potentially.
Yeah, but there's no guarantee that you would get the same map then.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm trying to understand why people want that, to be honest.
I mean, the thing is, Wargaming says it's not possible because the way I understand it, the map is only chosen once the game is found already, so there is no map to display beforehand. The way the matchmaker works.
Yeah, I can't. Like what we discussed, what we were talking about previously, is like their focus is always sort of on the general population of the game as opposed to these more specific competitive, semi-competitive modes. Them going in and tinkering and have even more specialized matchmaker just for this mode that does things differently, selects the map. At a different stage of the matchmaking, like selects the map and then selects the teams to go on them. I don't know. Maybe they just don't want to put the resources in. But yeah, aside from what you said about maybe they gives you a little bit of extra time to discuss strategy, I kind of can't see the benefit. But maybe there'll be like once this goes up on YouTube, maybe there'll be people going, "Duh, obviously Jedi, it's ... But yeah, the reasoning they give is that with the current matchmaking system, without making any changes to it, they would essentially have to have separate queues for each map, which would sort of dramatically slow things down. So, that kind of seems fair enough.
Then the next question is, could we have pickable spawn points for battle? And they basically say no. And I agree with them, because it would be a great idea if you had a fully pre-made team of people willing to work together, but it would be an utter problem with random battles, because as Wargaming even points out, right, there might be an imbalance on ships. Like it's already right now, you have ships spawn on both flanks, and then one flank just goes away for no reason, right? And you are sad. But it would be even worse because people would just probably spawn at a blob or something, right? Or your destroyers would all spawn at the same part, or ships would spawn like way further back or whatever.
It is kind of one of these things where it's sort of nice in theory, but way too many problems in implementation. Because you've got player behavior and to try and yes. I mean, I think we've seen in previous devlogs and things like they have different spawn areas for specific ships, and it's kind of weighted towards certain ship types. So you'll have like destroyers are more likely to spawn, here and here rather than at the back here and here kind of thing. So there is already some stuff going on with like it's not just totally randomized. And also the I think it tries to spawn divisions in a similar place. I mean, it's not always super successvel, but
it does. It used to be different in the beginnings of the game, but these days it spawns divisions at the same spot.
Even if you did have people sort of not abusing the system and all like trying to cluster up on one side or anything, like if you've got everyone in a destroyer that's trying to like go for one spot, for instance, is it like does only one person, I mean, only one person can get it, but how does it then determine which person of all the people that have selected that slot get it? Is it just first come first served, or does it just like randomize out of all the people that have picked that and then bungs the other people to other ones they didn't want? Or do you select preferences? Is it like preference voting? So you go, okay, I want to go that one first of all, but if I can't get that one, I want that one. If I can't get that one, I want that one. And it all kind of it would get way too complicated, I think. Even without players doing silly things.
It would be a good way to get reported early in battle because, you picked my spawn report.
Yeah, exactly. People wasting all their reports on you because I wanted that spawn spot. Yeah. Although, like there's probably some alternate universe where Wargaming has done that and they've monetized the heck out of it. So, pay some doubloons. You get to pick where you want to spawn.
Yeah, you have different spawns on the map. You have like the free spawns, the silver spawns, the gold spawns. You have to pay.
Yeah, the premium spawns. Yeah. Thank God we're not playing that version of the game. We shouldn't give them ideas, though.
Yeah,
absolutely,
definitely. Then the next question is an interesting one. Is the system in place that could prevent a player from getting the same map twice in a row? And they say such restrictions are already present in clan battles. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think... I can't remember if I'm remembering this for World of Tanks or if it is for World of Warships. It might be a World of Tanks thing, but I think there's a kind of... I think it is World of Tanks I'm thinking of, but there's like a soft cap system where it tries to prevent you getting the same map too many times in a row. Bearing in mind what we said earlier about there being a sort of a limited subset of maps in rotation on any given server on any given day. But in order to stop you getting like 3 or 4 times in a row on the same map, certainly World of Tanks, I'm pretty sure I'm correct in saying that there is such a system. But I don't know if there is for World of Warships. I don't know.
They don't have such a system for clan battles.
Yeah.
But they say it would be too complicated basically for random battles because everybody would have different past maps played.
Yeah, it might be one of these things that there's just enough like down to player base where there is enough player pop on the different servers to even get away with having that kind of soft cap rule. Where if you have like 2 in a row, it will try and put you on a different map for the third match kind of thing. But just because the numbers are generally a bit smaller in World of Warships, maybe that's just not feasible. There are sometimes systems like that where it's like if you have the player numbers, then it's fine and dandy. But if you don't have the player numbers, then you're just going to end up with much longer queue times, which can be a seriously off-putting thing for some people.
I mean, considering the shit the matchmaker pulls on a regular basis, if they try to hit it with more restrictions, I'm afraid what would happen.
There was I had a late night. It wasn't that late. It was like 1 a.m., half one, something like that. So relatively late for me, but it was probably it was later for the rest of Europe kind of thing. But it was like 6 or 7 players on the team, tier 10 game. I was the only battleship in my tier 8 Odin, so I didn't even have good hit points for being a tier 8 battleship. And everyone else was like sort of tier 9, tier 10 cruisers and destroyers. I think there was a carrier in play as well, so it was pretty wacky matchmaking. And I did not last long because I was the only battleship. I was by far the least stealthy ship. I only had the Odin's worth of hit points, which is like 52k. So when I had a Zhao and a Des Moines and a Daring all gunning for me and the aircraft carrier coming for me, it was not fun. So yeah, you don't want matchmaking like that on a more regular basis, where it's trying to find you a match within X amount of time, but it has additional rules to try and cope with, above and beyond what it already has to cope with.
Then the next question is something that I think has been asked many times in the past. Could we have dynamic maps with erupting volcanoes or moving indestructible icebergs? And they say yes.
I was sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, I think the reasoning behind this is the kind of changeable maps that you've had in some of the Battlefield games, possibly other games as well, where you can have major elements of the map that change, like buildings collapsing or broadcast towers being brought down, stuff like that. I don't see us ever having anything on quite that scale, but yeah. Sorry, I interrupted when you were going to say
problem.
that.
I mean, the thing is, they say they had things like that tested, prototyped, and planned, but basically what they're saying is they have sort of iced the idea for now to work on other things like submarines. They haven't mentioned submarines yet, but basically they said they're working on more important things that people don't want.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you get stuff like this that this has been talked about, teased previously, the idea of destructible icebergs that sort of split into different fragments, and even that kind of thing would be like, would it happen on its own, or would you, the players, have to make that happen, as in the Battlefield examples that I gave? Which, are you then going to have to be wasting your time shooting at icebergs and firing torpedoes at icebergs to get that to happen, kind of thing? So, yeah, I don't think this is ever going to be a particularly major factor, sort of changing topography. You'd have to have something sort of unrealistically dramatic, like a giant volcano erupting and like an island coming up, like Ocean, but a volcanic island suddenly arises in the middle of the map halfway through the game.
Atlantis kind of rises.
Yeah, yes. So, if you happen to be underneath it, well, sucks to be you. You're stuck on land now. So, yeah, I think there's sort of, I can see where somebody's coming from asking this question, but I think there's kind of a limited amount of whatever to do it within the game.
It depends on how drastic, right? Because, like we said, not just destructible icebergs, but moving icebergs, right? You could have like a big iceberg that just slowly moves along the map or something like that could be an interesting mechanic.
I think that would potentially be more interesting and more feasible. The other example I had kind of thought of is War Thunder added a lot more destructible buildings. Like, not every building is destructible in War Thunder, but there are some maps where there's a lot of destructible stuff, and so you sort of end up with this terrain of changing cover, sort of cover getting denuded over time. That was something they actually looked into in World of Tanks as well. That was a promised feature at one point, where they were going to have collapsible buildings, and that they even just kind of showed off physics tests footage of tanks ramming walls, and you'd have sort of sections of brick wall coming down. But they decided in the end that it was going to be sort of too intensive in terms of that many physics objects in the game engine, so they just kind of scrapped the whole idea. But I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what War Thunder does as well. Like, it's possible a building collapsing on your tank can destroy your tank, I'm pretty sure. So it's not a new idea, but yeah, I think something like the idea of the the moving iceberg across the map is probably the best possible implementation for warships.
I mean, the sad idea is that they basically say they have a shelf that they say instead they work on a higher priority feature such as improved operations and new game modes. The thing that pisses me off about like the sentence is that I think ever since they said in this article that they are now going to bring back operations, they have used it 3 times as an excuse already. And as I said, they have so often lied about bringing back operations. And they're like, "Oh, we're going to bring back operations. Oh, no, we can't. We can't do anything else. Oh, no, you want other cool features. Oh, no, operations. No, this is so great. We're going to bring back operations. Did we already tell you that we are going to bring back operations?"
Yeah. I mean, the optimist in me says, maybe they have actually committed real resources to it this time. That's why they can't do these other things. That these are now the lower priority things that are getting pushed down the task list sort of thing. But yeah,
we will see.
Maybe
maybe there is a bright future.
And this is just a completely random thought, but we could finally have the Project Habakkuk iceberg aircraft carrier on a map, even as just like a background element of just slowly chugging across the map. That way you have an excuse for it to actually be moving at decent speeds. So that could be quite fun. Oh, yeah.
Maybe one day.
Of course, again, if this was some alternate universe, we'd have that already. And, if you pay some doubloons at the start of the game, you get to take control of it, have all the, Lancaster bombers under your control and fly out and go after everybody else. There was actually a game I played briefly that was like that. It was some kind of Battlestar Galactica MMO thing, and it was possible if you were a premium player to actually, there were sort of conflict zones, and if your account had a certain status or if you paid something, or I can't even remember, but you could literally take control of the Battlestar Galactica inside these conflict zones for a period of time. On the sort of the to try and push the dynamic map forward kind of thing. So yeah, because most of the people were flying around in things like Vipers and Raptors and much smaller ships. So
it sounds like a mobile game mechanic.
It was obviously a free to play game. I didn't stick with it very long, but yeah. It is actually a thing that other games have sort of done in the past, so it wouldn't even be new.
Well, then the next question is also one that has been posed a lot, especially since submarines have been introduced. Would it be possible to have larger maps with more teams in random battles? And basically they go on telling everybody how well balanced their game is around 12 players, which is, the thing is, like half of what they're saying makes no sense, because there is a very vast difference if those 12 ships on a team are like what does the makeup between like destroyers, battleships, and so on. Like recently, I actually had a game with no submarines, 1 destroyer, 1 carrier, but basically 10 ships on each team was a mix of battleships and cruisers. And that produces a vastly different game experience than if you have like 4 or 5 destroyers, right? Because there are much more ships that are visible. And they go into this point, obviously, like the more ships that are on the enemy team, the less you can push, the more firepower there is, the more passive you have to play. So I do agree that increasing the number of players will change how the game is played. But I also go on about how they would have to make maps bigger, but it's also not true. Like 15 ships would easily fit on the current Tier 10 maps.
Yeah, I sort of take their point about like even an extra couple of ships, firepower, sort of focusing you down. It could make that focus fire even more unpleasant, and it can be pretty unpleasant at Tier 10 already if you're in something big and easy to hit like a battleship.
More ships would force more passive play in that sense.
Yeah, maybe. And then, like, if you have, teams of 15 and, like, say 5 of those can be, destroyers alone sort of thing, like, you could end up with even more torpedo soup at Tier 10. than is possible already. So, yeah, in terms of standard games, I think the game is sort of fine as is, but I honestly would really like to see. And this is the one thing I go back to World of Tanks for now is the frontline mode, where it's 30 versus 30, and you're sort of it's essentially an attack defense mode on a map that instead of like the usual, however big the maps are in World of Tanks, like 900 meters or something like that, but it's basically 9 map tiles size instead of the usual kind of one, so it's sort of 9 times as big and split into 3 different lanes. I think honestly something like that would be possible in World of Warships. And
I mean,
it sort of depends if the game engine and the server engine could then keep up with that many more extra players in a single match. But I think in terms of gameplay, that sort of thing could work. It just might be technical limitations. Like they were talking earlier about how much more room there is to grow in the engine, but I guess there are limits.
I mean, they say in this article that they obviously made a massive map like for the Big Hunt event. So they can make big maps. When it comes to how many players they could put on a map, that's questionable. But the problem I would personally see is how long it takes, especially the slower ships, to traverse. Like, maps are already massive, right? How long? Imagine if you had like let's just say it's 4 times 40 or 10 maps, right? Put together. Especially if like one team wins on the left flank and the other team wins on the right flank, how much time it would just take for those 2 sides to meet afterwards? I feel like it would probably not produce the most enjoyable experience, I think. But obviously it's subjective.
I mean, what they do with Frontline is it comes up every so often, so it's not like a permanent thing. And like I say, everything's split into lanes, including the spawn points, which are dynamic. So if you die, you can respawn, but you don't respawn right back at the bottom or the top of your starting lane. It kind of moves up. It sort of shifts as the front line itself shifts. So that wouldn't necessarily be a problem. But obviously, a big factor is the fact that there are respawns. So if you respawned, like if you were in a really slow tank like the Mouse, for example, or I don't know, there's probably other slow tanks at tier 10, but the Mouse is the one that immediately comes to mind. Like if you're having to crawl back across the whole map in a really slow tank, that wouldn't be much fun. But the fact that you can spawn a lot closer does make a difference. I don't know if that would be a big factor. But
we'd have to see, I guess, how it's designed.
Yeah, I honestly think that the balance. I think if you had a mode specifically designed around it, like Frontline, or even an exact analog of Frontline, I don't think that would be that big of an issue. I think the technical issues are probably the bigger blocking factor for them. I can see why they don't want to have more than 12 per side in standard games. And yes, subs do cause a bit of a problem. Like I had a game the other day where it was like 3 destroyers and 2 submarines, which is like, almost half the team being these sneaky torpedo spewing ships, potentially, which, it wasn't that fun an experience. Especially as there was also a carrier in play. It kind of made the bigger ships feel pretty, like it was not at all a comfortable experience. It wasn't fun. So yeah.
But that's the main reason why I dislike all of we are so balanced for 12 versus 12 battles, because the matchmaker isn't consistent enough to make that statement, right? Because I
mean, my solution there is just, drop submarines, get rid of subs. It's fine. It's easy. There you go. Problem solved. We go back to what we had before. But
where do I sign?
Yeah, given that subs are now sort of in the game, I don't know. I'd quite like a hard limit of 1 sub per team, but that probably isn't going to happen either.
1 sub or carrier.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's absolutely the worst when you get 2 subs and a carrier. That's just like, can we go back to port, please?
Don't worry, they'll send you back to port very quickly.
Yeah. Now that I've had that thought, though, I actually do kind of want to see Frontline added to World of Warships now. I haven't really specifically had that thought before, but that question has kind of prompted it. So, yeah, probably never going to happen, but who knows?
I mean, the next question addresses some classic game modes, such as Capture the Flag, King of the Hill, and Last Man Standing. And I mean, they basically say they would all be problematic, like Capture the Flag. I mean, sure, like, the problem is you'd need some very specific ships to, like, grab a flag and bring back. I could see it in a sense to be fun, but since certain ships would be sort of such a big advantage,
yeah,
might be a problem.
I mean, the
balancing-wise.
only game I ever really played that, like, I haven't played that many online shooty games, but Team Fortress 2 definitely had a capture the flag mode, and they just had a hard limit on the number of scouts that you could have, which are by far the fastest class. But you know, the scouts are always by far the best suited for actually going and grabbing the flag because they're just absolutely nutty fast. So yeah,
you know, imagine a submarine surfacing, grabbing the flag, and then running with 50 knots.
So yeah, as I say, you'll just have to have respawning, which is not usually present. But yeah, I mean, you could have a special mode, an event mode. Like I think capture the flag could kind of be doable. It might not be great, but it could kind of be done in World of Warships.
I think it would be too problematic because let's say even if you have the same number of destroyers, right? Some destroyers are much faster than others. Some destroyers could easier go in the snag of, like a French, right? A French with the French
speed boost.
Yeah, with the speed boost and the like the mechanic where they take less damage.
Oh, the saturation, yeah.
Saturation, exactly. That was what I'm looking for. If you had like a French just going in, grabbing like the flag and then running like hell, this is something that you'd have trouble replicating if maybe you only have, I don't know, an Elbing or something like yourself.
Yes. I mean, but then you might, it might also be a self-selecting thing of like people would be more likely to take ships suitable for the mode. I don't know.
Yeah, true, I guess.
Anyway, but yeah, it doesn't sound like we'll ever see that, but I think in theory it could be done. King of the Hill, which they sort of point out as, you know, Epicenter is sort of a variation of that center-focused map mode. And it wasn't massively popular, as they've stated. And they also say Last Man Standing, a free-for-all mode, which we actually have had in event modes, or at least some limited form of it. Where,
I mean, we had the 4 teams.
Yeah, right. So like teams of 2. Or I'm sure we've had events where you could form a team within the game as well. You start off on your own, but you can form a team with somebody.
Yeah, the big hunt stuff.
Yes, so, you know, they've kind of sort of had that in the game as well. But, yeah, I don't know if it would fit sort of well in a random context. Because, like, how would you do that matchmaking-wise? Like, you'd have to have single classes only or something like that.
Yeah, it would be a bit weird. And you'd also need, like, you'd once again need, like, a map that's shrinking, sort of, to force the engagement. I mean, I feel like what's a better version of Last Man Standing was, like, the water or however it was called, battles, right? Where you had 4 teams of 3 and a map that shrinks, and everybody was, like, the special destroyers. I think that would be the closest thing, and that worked pretty well. But I think that's the closest you get to free-for-all that's going to make much sense in Warships.
Maybe. I mean, we've had... We sort of... I don't know if they've done it that recently, but around the time of, like, World Cups and stuff like that, World of Tanks gets almost... what's the car football game? Terrible at remembering things today.
Alphabet, you mean Rocket League?
Rocket League, there we go. I should know I've played Rocket League. I've got Rocket League. I just haven't played it in a while. But there's a sort of Rocket League almost style tank football mode that they do, that they've done several times. So, you know, maybe we could get that for World of Warships as ships sort of chasing around after a giant football that floats on the water, and they have to knock it into. Who knows? It's a silly idea.
I mean, that could be fun.
Yeah. It would be silly, but no more silly than some of the other things they've done.
True. I mean, it would go to back to something like bathtub battles, right?
Yeah.
Maybe one day.
So the next question is: any chance of implementing community-designed maps into the game? I'm trying to think if this has been a thing for World of Tanks, even.
I mean, the thing is,
I don't know.
If you want community design maps, like if you'd had this sort of map building tools, like modding tools, where people could actually fully make maps, it would make sense. The thing is, if it's just about ideas, well, what they are saying is that obviously, like last year, they had this vote onto the about the visuals of a map, but I mean, the players have no input on like how you'd like the island design or so on. In that regard, they haven't taken input, and in that regard, I think they have been a little bit very conservative. Because it's like also like how they place the domination zones. They have like the 3, or then they have the 4, but they haven't had 3 points in a triangle, right? They have the 3 points always in a line. Or I feel like they
have on sometimes like clan battle maps. I think they've done that configuration, but not random ones or ranked. Yeah.
And I feel like why not try to be a little bit more creative with this, or a little? It's like this is something that shouldn't be too hard to try out a few new things there. But anyway,
I guess it's one of those things where I can kind of see them having not done something like this, because maps are sort of quite an involved process generally. It's it's a fair amount of time and resources to get a map from conception to finish, and certainly for World of Tanks, I know there have been a whole plethora of just completely abandoned maps that they started on, spent some time working on, tried to balance, couldn't balance, and abandoned. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's. I mean, we already had earlier on. We were talking about the Barents Sea map that has been effectively abandoned, and that they clearly didn't want to put more time and resources into getting it balanced for sort of general game use outside of the mode it was kind of conceptualized alongside. So it's sort of in terms of time and effort, I can see why they haven't done something like that. But I agree that probably the best compromise they can do is having communities sort of vote on the concept of how a map will look, the theme of the map. And they actually do point out that we have had this sort of implementation already.
Yeah, once last year.
They also say it's worth bearing in mind the gameplay features of new maps are developed largely on the basis of feedback from the participants in various testing phases. Therefore, in a way, players are already involved in the creation process, which is kind of technically correct, but not really in the spirit of the question. You guys are involved, really. So, that was just kind of an unnecessary addendum to the answer, really. I can see, again, it's one of those questions where I can see why someone would ask it, but it's kind of sort of obvious what the answer is going to be, and it's obvious why. It's quite straightforward as to why that is the answer. That kind of map creation and making it I'm sure people have been happy to sit down and create all kinds of weird and wonderful things, even with just pencil and paper. But actually making that into a usable, playable map, that's going to, even just getting to the point of testing whether it's going to be a usable or playable map is going to take time and resources.
I mean, it comes about more or less, would they be willing to create sort of modding tools? I have no idea what goes into the map creation, but of course there are games where you have a few tools, right? You start out with a map, you pick basically the size, it's all ocean, and then you have the island place, right? They need to create a few assets basically that you can just then place there and make your own map. But they'd have to make a map designer in that sense.
Yeah,
and then let the
I'm
community
pretty
play
sure
with it.
War Thunder allows custom-made maps that you can then go and like play battles on. But it's not like they're in the official rotation or anything. It's like people have to go and download them and sort of make sure there's enough other
Yeah, it
people
would be something that you do in a
play with.
training room or so, where you could design your own thing.
I think they are essentially training room battles. So, but I've seen people like Fly Daly's done some pretty wacky stuff on custom maps, like a whole bunch of players in SPAAs and a whole bunch of other players in like bombers and just silly things basically. And Warships doesn't really have that, and World of Tanks doesn't really have that much either. Beyond training rooms, so. Yeah, it would need those kind of tools, which just don't really exist. I mean, wargaming generally, it took a really long time to embrace even sort of client mods in terms of like UI stuff. And for a long time in World of Tanks, it was the only way to get extra information in the UI was to go and find various mods. And it took a really long time for Wargaming to go, okay, these mods are quite popular. Maybe we should actually incorporate some of this stuff into the game.
There was no way to sort the tier of your tank in your garage.
Yes, there was stuff like that. There was stuff like you had basically no information on the minimap beyond kind of like you'd have a little icon. There was no information of like view ranges or what you could and couldn't see or what the actual tanks were or when they were last spotted. Like there was no last spotted markers, for instance, for a really long time. So you just had to kind of rely on your memory, and you had to be like if you had a terrible memory or a terrible, sort of attention span of
also you didn't constantly look at the minimap. Maybe a tank was only spotted for a few seconds.
Yes, and you'd have to rely on asking in the chat, was such and such a tank, where were they last seen? How many hit points did they have? Stuff like that. Whereas these days, a lot of those tools are just like baked into the game. So it took a really long time for that to happen. And likewise with World of Warships, there was stuff that started off in mods, but Warships at least had the benefit of coming along after a lot of stuff had already been added to the tanks sort of information, UI side, the garage side stuff. So a lot of that stuff sort of started off baked into World of Warships. But even then, still, even with Warships, it took a while for there to be any kind of officially supported / acknowledged mod pack even. For a while, using some mods was certainly a dicey proposition because even if they were benign, they might get flagged as being malicious mods. So these days, at least players have the option of going, well, okay, this is the official mod pack. All of this stuff should be fine. Although I think even then there's been instances of people getting into trouble for using stuff that's supposedly, is meant to be in the official mod pack. It's meant to be fine, but then they get a ticket going, oh, you've been using unauthorized modifications.
Yeah, but that's something you should be able to get fixed at least.
Yes. Yeah, at least then you can point to it and say, this was all in the official mod pack, goddammit. So, yeah. I mean, I don't think we'll ever see any of this kind of scale of modding.
Probably not.
For Warships. So off the back of the last question, they kind of then go into more detail about what it is actually like to take a map from conception to an actual, finished end product.
Yeah, so basically it's the first 2 months or so where they test it and design it. And then once they have the gameplay fix, obviously they don't start working on the textures and appearances so until they are happy with it, otherwise this might be wasted. Which means that it takes them about 2 months to come up with the concept of a map and actually have it tested. And then, at this point, it's basically final that the map is going to appear and you can then focus on the art. But it also means that it's actually a relatively small time to lay the groundwork for a map.
Yeah. Let's say relatively, that's still a fair chunk of like 1 to 2 months is still for a single map. A map is a fairly the number of maps compared to the number of ships, it doesn't really compare. But it's still a sort of a fairly important asset. So I guess it taking a bit longer sort of makes sense. I mean, off the back of the last question, I suppose technically there's nothing stopping them doing a kind of community map contest with a caveat that whatever design somebody comes up with will probably significantly change, or we might just throw it out altogether, kind of thing. Which, like, if you're doing that kind of contest, you've also almost got to commit to there will be a map at the end of it, sort of thing. So it would be complicated but doable, but also would have the potential to generate community backlash. So I can see why they would just want to steer clear of it altogether.
I mean, what they would have to do is like sort of hold a contest where people sort of can like draw a sort of map or an idea they have, and then obviously, I mean, they'd be picking the winner, so they'd only be picking a concept that they think is workable, right? And then they could let the person themselves test and have a little bit of feedback. The problem is wargaming, as we've learned, there tends to be some miscommunications, and they don't seem to be very good at working with others. But technically, this would be completely feasible, right? And have the community give some input on basically what they want or something like that. But it's unlikely the wargaming will really do something. As we know, they are not very good at involving their community or listening to feedback or taking anyone's suggestions.
It is, it tends to be quite peripheral stuff. And to be honest, on some levels, I'm sort of happy with the level of things that they do. In some ways, things like the community contests for camos, for instance, there's been some really nice camos that have come out of that. So,
true, that's amazing.
Yeah. A map is certainly a lot higher level of complexity than a ship camo. And even, I mean, the one time where there has been any kind of direct player input with even the kind of conceptual origins of a ship was the Paolo Emilio, where they basically at the is it 2018, 2017, where they had basically a bunch of the people that the content creators they invited to St. Petersburg, and were like, okay, let's sit down and brainstorm a thing. And the finished Paolo Emilio really didn't bear much resemblance to what they'd come up with. So.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a ship, right? A map. If you have a map that's more or less symmetrical.
My point is that that's also a fairly complicated kind of thing to get that kind of concept from even a quite a relatively expert group of players like CCs that they had invited, that people that were quite involved with the game, that were quite familiar with how things worked, as opposed to just random casual players on the forums going, I think this would be a good idea. So, I mean, the one time when they did try that was during the extremely extended Graf Zeppelin development time after its disastrous initial launch.
Ships, right? I think a map is... sure, a map needs to be balanced, but basically, if you just have a somewhat symmetrically map,
yes,
right? It's
still,
just all about...
I think I take your point. I think it's more complicated than a map to get right.
And let's be honest, we have quite a few maps that are not that great and that screw over quite a few ship classes and so on, and we have ocean with no islands. If you just take a random piece of, like, just blank canvas of ocean and put a few islands somewhere and make it symmetrical, you got a map, right? Might not be the best map, but it's probably better than a few that we already have in game. So honestly, there can't go that many things wrong, as long as you make it symmetric. You can't really screw it up that much. And then you can still move islands around a bit, decide where the cap zones are, test a little bit, raise or lower some islands if you want certain ships to shoot over it, right? Like, it's really not that complicated.
But yeah, it's the sort of thing that would require some kind of specialized tool, though, to even create an abstract where you not only have like the top-down overhead layout, but also things like the height map of the islands, the shape of the islands. You would need some way to be able to
keep in mind
shapes.
that one on the CC summits, but the people in St. Petersburg, the CCs that created the map, right? And they made that playable, like obviously not with textures and finish, but basically they made a playable concept of that while they were there. So within a day, those people drew a map and they implemented it and then they played the map, right? So that's how quick the first stage is, and then it comes about moving around an island and balancing it and so on. But
yeah, that would be the extreme first version, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, sure, but my point is that you could easily implement that. Also, they never made anything this right. They had the CCs that design a map and they played on that map there once, but then they threw it all away, right? They didn't be like, okay, maybe we can make something with this. They didn't go any further, even though they had their own contributors there and made that and played that there. And then Wargaming just threw the idea away. They even didn't consider like making this into a project and into a map. But as I said, it would be easy to have the community a bit help out there, give some insight or whatever.
I'm of the opinion that it would be interesting to do. But like we've been saying, I don't think they'll do it.
Yeah, unfortunately. They probably won't.
So we're almost at the end of this. We've got two questions left to go.
I mean, the historical battles, that's something that there wasn't a devlog recently.
Yeah, there was something already saying that they were working on a map idea that was actually going to be like fully sort of real world accurate, as opposed to the themed but abstracted maps that we basically have now. But yeah, as we said at the time, I distinctly remember you saying that planet Earth was not designed with the balance for fighting naval battles in mind. So yeah, we'll see how far that goes. But it'll be interesting to have at least one sort of fully. This is how this area actually looked that had a naval battle fought in it, kind of thing.
Well, I mean, that's what perhaps is so great for an operation, right? You could replay a historical battle.
Yeah, it'd be a lot easier for that. I mean, I think Cherry Blossom, I don't know how accurate it was, but it was based on an actual operation within, was it in the Philippines? New Guinea? I can't remember, somewhere. It was around that area of the Pacific. It was based on an operation in a bay. And they sort of took their cues from that, but I don't know if it was like, this is what this bay looks like. But yeah, operations, absolutely. We even had, I mean, I suppose the other example would be Dunkirk, where it was this quite shrunk down version of the English Channel.
Yeah, we'll see. They definitely have decided to start experimenting with it. If any historical map makes it into random battles, remains to be seen.
Indeed. And then our last question, are there any map themes or biomes that have never been used due to technical limitations? And they basically say no. Which I'm struggling to think of, like, how would you struggle with something like that wasn't going to completely impact gameplay, like, massively rough seas or something like that?
I mean, if it's just
they probably
textures,
could even do that. Yeah.
You obviously have no limitations. You can paint your map any way you want. I feel more like that the question would be, has there ever been an idea for, like, maybe a weather or some mechanic that they couldn't implement? Or like a proper storm or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. It's like this. I think there's stuff that maybe would not work for gameplay reasons, but like I'm struggling to think like technical. Like there might be stuff that would dump your frame rate, like if they had a map with like really heavy fog that was the limiting factor, for example, or like continuous blizzard, or like even the cyclone. It just kind of reduces the visibility and you get some rain effects, but it's not particularly heavy.
I mean,
so I guess you could kind of consider them technical limitations, but it doesn't mean they're impossible. It just means they would tank your frame rate.
I mean, I think they said a few years back that they couldn't do really rough sea because their water was just like a flat surface, even though it didn't look otherwise. But for gameplay terms, it was a flat surface, so it couldn't like toss their ship around too much. Not sure how. I mean, currently ships obviously go up and down in the waves a bit, so they have done a lot with the water. But I remember that years back they said there was a technical limitation with how the water is, right? When it came to rough seas. I feel like maybe it's about something like this.
I mean, the newer implementation of water has almost certainly been since then. Even before the bobbing ships, I think they changed the water rendering a little while ago. But then you have like even with the bobbing up and down, it doesn't affect your aim. And the one game I have played where playing in rough weather actually does affect things is Naval Action, which again I haven't played in a while, but quite a while at this point. But if you're playing that in the open world and you sail into an area where it's stormy, it has actual quite severe negative gameplay effects. So if you have too much sail up, for example, you can end up damaging your sails, I'm pretty sure. Or if you're trying to aim at people and you're kind of madly going up and down on the ocean, it's really, really hard. So that's the kind of thing that would be. It would be, it's not that it would be visually nice in game. You have these massive storm waves going on, but it's not very likely. Like the one implementation out of any of the World of games where there's been kind of severe weather effects was actually the console version of World of Tanks. There was a couple of special maps. The one was a sandstorm and the other was like a tropical cyclone kind of thing. I've actually got a video on my channel from ages back. Somebody had recorded off their console and basically sent me the video file, and I was able to do a commentary over it. And like visually, it looked all right, but it was probably taxing the limits of the hardware in terms of displaying everything. And it was a rare thing in World of Tanks of having a condition that actually affected view range, which otherwise just isn't a thing in World of Tanks. So
I mean,
yeah.
There is a lot that could be done with weather effects and generally environmental effects that could also spice up the game in a way, right? Because I think it's sometimes nice if something breaks up the stale gameplay that you have in some maps. If it's just like a storm that goes in that allows you to move a little bit further or cover or whatever, right? It can make a nice difference, and it could obviously do more with that. Or as we've talked earlier with like the weather, as you mentioned, you could start in the dark in a map and it could get brighter as the battle goes on or things like that.
I mean, I think the kind of the roving weather zones that you get on some maps are partially historically inspired. There was some engagement, and I can't remember what it was now, but it was a group of American battleships equipped with radar were basically able to sort of hide within or behind a storm front, and the Japanese forces basically weren't able to see them, but the American battleships could range find using their radar, and so they had this kind of mobile front where their radar was able to pick out the enemy targets, and they could basically fire with impunity, and the Japanese, relying on their optics, couldn't see them back, sort of thing. So we kind of have that in game, which is a nice feature. But even having sort of more cosmetic, like passing through rain squalls or whatever, that don't actually have an effect on gameplay necessarily, but just break up the weather a bit, or like drifting fog banks, or I don't know. There is still stuff that you could have in the game. And they have started to add a few more dynamic elements to maps, like the volcanoes erupting, but those are more kind of purely visual. But you could have some purely visual weather effects, is I guess what I'm saying. They don't necessarily have to affect gameplay. Just break things up a bit.
I wouldn't mind if there is something just rain without any other effect, but just a bit of rain.
Because there are some maps you start off and it's like you actually start the map and there's like a bit of a rain effect going on, and then it just kind of goes away. It'd be interesting if that would then sort of appear at different times throughout the map, or in different places on the map, and it just kind of looks a bit different, looks a bit nice.
Yeah,
bit of a rainbow in the background appears, maybe.
Definitely.
Or it starts snowing and your crewmen come out on the deck and build a little snowman.
I mean, they've already added that on snowy maps. There's no snow on your deck.
There's that snow texture now. Yeah.
That's a nice touch. Obviously, they could do it that you don't start with that, but during the battle it starts snowing and then the snow accumulates on your ship and things like that.
A bit, yeah. It would be even. I mean, this is probably completely fanciful thinking, but the iced up permacamos for Edinburgh and Scharnhorst. It would be interesting if on some maps you had like ice accumulation as you were going. If you survive to the end of the game, you've got like ice accumulating on all the railings and like icicles hanging down from various surfaces, sort of thing. Which I don't know. Like that would probably be way too intensive in terms of like you'd have to model zones on individual ships where that stuff would appear, sort of thing. So probably will never happen beyond having specific permacamos like the Edinburgh and the Scharnhorst, but that'd still be kind of cool. It's a bit silly when you take those really icy permacamos and they're on a sunny tropical map and you're like, well, why isn't it melting?
It's okay, I'm taking a tropical camo into...
It's ruined.
You can have your Atlanta beach in a snow map, then you actually have snow on the sand.
So yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. It would be nice. Maybe sometime further down the line, we'll get some sort of more cosmetic things added just to pretty the game up a bit. Which, to be fair, the game has come on a fairly long way since it even went into beta. It's still it's like it's always been an okay looking game, and it's just got steadily nicer over time. So
Oh yeah.
But it must be said at least once an episode, art department saves the day. It
Definitely.
must be said. Can't not say
it. They are doing a great job, and so, I have to say the game looks pretty beautiful these days.
The questions kind of end there, so I don't know. We can have a quick check of like, somehow there's been a blog magically appearing.
There are technically two dev blogs. One is changes to test ships that nobody cares, and then there are details about the maps in. Basically, they say the maps for Clan Battle Season 18. So if anybody is into Clan Battles, you can check which maps are going to be in the next season.
I'm not seeing anything dramatic on those changes either. Some buffs to Delana, some minor nerfs to other things. So we may or may not take those in next week, but it's the kind of thing we could gloss over normally. So yeah. So I don't think there isn't really much else to talk about. I mean, there is an event that's just started today, the Summer Days thing, Armory event. Whole new token, of course, just for this event. I don't think it's new, actually. We've had this event and this token before, but various bundles of various things, and of course you can spend the balloons on things. That summer usable camos coming back, distant voyages containers. So you can go check that out yourself. I don't think there's anything particularly interesting in that.
Are those voyage containers like the camo containers again, where you have a chance to get a perma camo for a ship that you probably don't own?
I don't actually know. Does it say? When I logged into my NA account, I had a bunch of those. I forget what we call them, but the premium token or whatever you want to call it for your ship. The economic bonus package. That's what they're calling it. I had a bunch of those pop up for ships that I don't actually have on NA, and I think it must have been from getting camos from on my NA thing from the from previous events, like getting distant voyages containers. So does it actually say what is in a distant voyages container?
Yeah, I've got it here.
Premium containers, yes, it does. So there is a
14.5% chance to get a permanent camouflage, 7.5% for a special camo, 4.5% for rare, and 2.5% for unique.
Wow, those rare ones, that was an event camo from ages ago. That was like one of the first event camos they did. I've still got a bunch of those on various like Fuso and other ships. It's very similar to one of the consumable camos. But Yeah, it's entirely possible that you might get a ship. There's a bunch of other ones as well: Snowy, New Year's, Three Crowns, Winter.
You know,
Okay.
they also state here, all camouflages only change the exterior ship and don't provide any economic or combat bonuses. So basically, they have brought back the containers from last year, but nerfed them this year by taking away the combat bonus.
Yeah, you would think that it would be like, okay, you get especially if they're the same price, which I don't know if they are any cheaper. 750. What were they that last time? 1,000. I honestly can't remember.
Don't know.
But yeah, so they're gamble boxes, and they're actually a bit worse in value potentially because you're just getting the perma camo.
Keep in mind, if it's the first perma camo that you're getting for a ship, it's actually relatively cheap. Although you might get some perma camos in here that you.
Some of these are ones that you don't necessarily like. You're not gonna necessarily get any other way. Like I'm actually just scrolling down. There's a bunch of these which are like the preview event camos, Waterworld. Like some of the like the Iron Cross ones, for instance, with the German battleship kind of preview camos, Victorian white, French Navy ones with the ribbons. So yeah, there's a bunch of these, but there's also some kind of like event ones, like the winter ones and the Waterworld and anniversary camos. So I mean, there's quite a list here. It would be nice if it said, hey, you're going to get, like, you're guaranteed to get a camo for, like, if you have one of these ships, you'll, like, that'll be the pool it pulls from of the ships that you actually own. But, I don't think that is. So, gamble boxes, more gamble boxes. There's actually been some news in the UK. There was a report from, it was a parliamentary committee, I believe, saying, hey, we should probably regulate these. And the government was just like, yeah, nah. It's fine. Industry self-regulation is perfectly fine and definitely won't be abused. So even though the report was like, hey, these things are problematic, they specifically target individuals who, have actual issues with gambling. A lot of whales are not necessarily people that can actually afford stuff. It's just they have issues with gambling, and companies are perfectly happy to exploit them. Which is kind of a bit disgusting in of itself. And the UK government, the current government, which we don't often bring politics in, but man, if you've been watching the shenanigans of the UK government recently, in the current leadership race, I mean, it's a race to the bottom. It really is. So it's kind of not surprising that this government just kind of shrugged and went, "Yeah, it's fine. We'll let the companies themselves handle it. We'll let the foxes regulate the chicken coops. It'll be fine." So, yeah, sadly, like the UK, I think if the UK had moved on that might have been a fairly major thing. But as I think we've talked about previously, it'll take like some kind of EU-wide move, which now does not include the UK, before companies like Wargaming start to pull their socks up a bit, as it were.
Definitely.
So, even though we can now look at these things and see the percentages, which is absolutely a step forwards from previously, they're still gamble boxes at the end of the day, even if you can now just see the specific odds and how low they are.
An important thing that Darth Michael mentioned, that like if you open those random gamble boxes and you get a permanent camo for a ship, keep in mind that right now the first permanent visual is discounted that you get for a ship, right? If you were to open this gamble box and you get a visual for a ship that you don't like you don't like the visual, if you were then to buy the visual that you do like, you'd have to pay more for it. So that box can actually screw you.
Yes, you might end up like, instead of a camo costing, getting the one that costs 200, you actually kind of like the look the like of. You spend 750, get one that you don't like the look of, and then you go and look at this ship and go, oh, that other camo is quite nice, and now I have to pay 2,000 doubloons. I absolutely still think they should. Like the fact that the first one is low is nice, but the rest of them should be lower as well, even if they're still a little bit higher. They should still be half price or lower kind of thing. So Yeah, I absolutely do not agree with the way Wargaming did that. Anyway, so I think that's the only other sort of event in the last week, really. There's been other various articles like how to play torpedo destroyers and dry dock on the Heisen and other things. They've been really pushing their community Discord. I think there's some kind of set of missions you get for joining the community Discord, for example. But yeah, otherwise it's been sort of relatively quiet this week.
No, my name was involved. And no, those camos don't include the economic bonuses. You only get the visuals, so you only
purely
get
the camo.
Yeah, it's purely the camo. Last year you got the economic bonus too, right, for those containers. But this year they have the same containers, just worse.
I'm actually kind of tempted to look up. Can we search the?
I mean, they might have been cheaper last year. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm probably more likely to find it on some third party.
Maybe.
Let's see if I can find out what they were doing last year. The site will load. Right, 0.97 summer event, 2021, and that does not have any prices. That's not very useful.
So they might have reduced price or not, but you definitely don't get the economic bonus this time. You only get the visuals. So, and if you already have, if you get the visuals that you don't like on a ship, then the next visual will be more expensive, so you can screw yourself. And obviously you can get camos for ships you don't have. So if you like, this is one of the worst possible crates you could ever spend money on.
It's not impressive, really. I mean, it's there as, you know.
Of course, yeah. So some camos cannot be bought directly. So yes, this is the only chance of getting some camos that are otherwise not available. But
that's meant to be the hook, though, of the fact that is then, you know, gamble boxes with actually quite a wide range of things. Is a bit. I won't say cheeky. Cheeky is underselling it a bit.
Scummy.
Yeah. I'm still trying to find a thing that has actual prices. Which, again, this article does not. Which is kind of annoying. Which is also very convenient for them if you're trying to compare what the prices were versus what the prices are. Oh well, I guess we'll wrap things up then, rather than be you trying to desperately fill time while I desperately try and search for prices.
So, in that case, I think that's it from us this week. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll be back next week with the next podcast. And have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.